Chapter 1. The audit that wasn't in the ledger. Randy Olsen trusted numbers because they behaved. They lined up where they were supposed to. They followed rules. They revealed inconsistencies without emotion or ambiguity. If something didn't add up, it wasn't because the numbers were lying. It was because someone else was. People, on the other hand, had a habit of disappearing. Randy adjusted the column on his laptop with a small flick of precision, barely looking up as the store manager across from him explained something he didn't need explained. It was day 2 of the audit, which meant explanations were no longer helpful, they were just noise. "I promise we've been really careful about inventory this quarter," the manager said, smiling too wide, like someone trying to convince themselves as much as him. "I'm sure," Randy replied without looking up. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't friendly either. It simply existed. His tone lived in that quiet middle ground where conversation usually died of natural causes. The manager hesitated, lingered, then eventually nodded and stepped away. Randy marked another line, checked another figure, closed another invisible loop. Everything was consistent so far. Predictable. He preferred it that way. By noon, he powered down his laptop and slipped it into his bag with practiced efficiency. Lunch wasn't something he thought about much. It was something his body reminded him to do so he wouldn't pass out in the middle of a balance sheet. The mall food court was crowded in that chaotic midday way, voices overlapping, trays clattering, the distant echo of someone laughing too loudly. He chose a table on the edge, positioning himself where he could see most of the exits without consciously acknowledging why. Old habits didn't need names. He ate mechanically, attention drifting in and out, not focused on anything in particular. The hum of sound around him blurred into something indistinct, until it didn't. A voice cut through. It wasn't louder than the others. It didn't demand attention, but it landed in his ears with a kind of precision that bypassed thought entirely. Randy stilled. The fork paused halfway to his mouth. He didn't recognize the voice because of what it said. He recognized it because of what it was. Familiar. Not recent. Not accessible. But embedded somewhere deeper than memory, like a word in a language he no longer spoke but somehow still understood. Slowly, almost cautiously, he turned his head. 10 feet away, at a table by the railing, sat 2 women. One of them laughed. Sunlight caught in her hair, streaking through it in a way that made everything seem lighter, warmer, like the moment had its own weather. She leaned forward slightly as she spoke, animated, effortless, and completely, impossibly wrong. Randy's chest tightened. He stared, eyes narrowing as his brain struggled to correct what it was seeing. It couldn't. The woman turned her head slightly. And just like that, the argument ended. There was no mistaking her. Time had changed the details, softened edges, added years, but not enough to erase recognition. Not enough to rewrite something that had been carved into him before he knew what permanence meant. His mother. The word didn't rise gently. It struck, heavy and immediate, like a dropped weight hitting the floor. His body reacted before his mind could intervene. He stood. The chair scraped faintly against the tile, but he barely registered it. His vision tunneled, narrowing until there was only the short distance between them. Each step felt deliberate, unreal, like walking through something that might disappear if he moved too quickly. Closer, closer. The other woman, young, mid-20s perhaps, was talking, unaware of the unraveling happening 2 feet away. She gestured with her hands, smiling, her energy bright in a way that felt almost intrusive. Then Randy reached the table. Both women looked up. They were smiling. It hit him in a strange way, that detail. That, for a fraction of a second, before recognition rearranged everything, they were just 2 people enjoying lunch. Normal. The moment stretched. His mother's eyes met his. The smile vanished. Not gradually. Not uncertainly. It dropped away entirely, replaced by something raw and immediate: shock, recognition, something almost like fear. Her hand flew to her mouth. The younger woman blinked, looking between them, confusion beginning to take shape. Randy opened his mouth. He had imagined this moment before. Different versions, different tones. Anger sharpened into precise words. Questions lined up like accusations, ready to land. A lifetime of silence condensed into something devastating. He had rehearsed it. None of it came. All that existed in the space between thought and speech was the simplest, most incomplete truth. "Hi," he said quietly. A beat passed. His throat tightened slightly, but the words still came, shaped by instinct more than intention. "Mom." The younger woman's gaze snapped fully to him. "Mom?" she echoed, the word uncertain, like she wasn't sure it belonged here. Randy didn't look at her. He couldn't. His attention was locked on the woman in front of him, the one who had once defined his entire world and then, without warning, removed herself from it. She lowered her hand slowly. "Randy." The way she said his name, soft, disbelieving, made something in his chest twist in a way he immediately resented. "You remember," he said. It wasn't a question. Carried no warmth. It simply existed, flat and factual. Her eyes flickered, pain surfacing, but he didn't care. Or rather, he told himself he didn't. Of course I," she started, then stopped, words failing her. For a moment, none of them spoke. The The sounds of the food court crept back in around them, distant but persistent, as if reality was reminding them it hadn't paused for this. The younger woman cleared her throat. Okay, she said carefully, glancing between them. I feel like I missed a lot. Randy shifted his gaze to her for the first time. Up close, the resemblance was subtle but undeniable once you saw it. Something in the eyes, maybe. The shape of her expression. Not identical, but connected. He felt a cold, methodical realization begin to form. How old are you? He asked. The question caught her off guard. 24, she replied cautiously. Randy nodded once. A simple calculation completed itself. Of course. His gaze flicked back to his mother. You didn't just leave, he said, voice still calm, almost detached. You had somewhere to go. Her face paled. Randy, it's not that simple. It actually is, he cut in. No raised voice. No dramatic shift. Just precision. You packed everything that mattered. You signed papers so you wouldn't have to come back. His eyes held hers. You planned it. The younger woman looked between them again, tension rising in her posture. Can someone please explain what's happening? She asked, the brightness from earlier gone completely. Randy studied her for a moment. Innocent. That was the word that surfaced. Not responsible. Not involved. Just here. You should ask her, he said finally. His mother inhaled shakily. Melanie, she said softly, turning to the younger woman. This is your brother. The word hung in the air. Brother. Melanie blinked. My what? Randy didn't react outwardly, but something inside him shifted, subtle, unwelcome. He had come here expecting nothing. He hadn't expected this. Melanie looked at him again, really looking now, searching his face like it might rearrange itself into something more understandable. That's not, she started, then stopped. That's not possible. You never. I know, his mother said, voice strained. Silence followed. Heavy, complicated, undeniable. Melanie let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Wow, she said faintly. Okay. Yeah. This is a lot. Randy nodded slightly. That's one way to put it. She looked at him again, uncertainty softening her features. So, you're really my brother? The question was simple, earnest, and for some reason that made it harder to answer. Randy exhaled quietly. Looks like it. Another pause. Then Melanie did something he wasn't prepared for. She smiled. Not broadly, not carelessly, just genuinely. Hi, she said. Randy stared at her for a second, caught off guard. Then, despite himself, despite everything, that faint, unfamiliar rhythm crept into his voice. Hi. He didn't understand why that felt more complicated than anything else that had happened in the last 5 minutes. He just knew that it did. And that nothing about this was going to stay simple. Chapter 2, Unreconciled Accounts, the moment could not hold. It fractured under the weight of everything unsaid. Everything years too late and far too large to fit in the space between 3 people sitting at a small plastic table in a food court. Randy felt it first, not as a dramatic shift, but as a quiet reassertion of reality. The noise around them pressed back in, the smell of food, the movement of strangers who didn't care that his world had just been rearranged. He stepped back. It was a small motion, almost imperceptible. But it created distance, and right now distance felt necessary. I have to get back to work, he said. The words landed flat, practical, as if he hadn't just collided with the past. Melanie blinked. Wait, what? His mother leaned forward slightly. Randy, please just. No, he said, shaking his head once. Not angry, not loud, just final. I've got what I need. That wasn't entirely true, and they all knew it. But it was the only truth he was willing to stand on. Melanie's expression shifted, confusion mixing with something more deliberate now. No, you don't, she said. Randy paused. There was something about the way she said it, steady, unafraid, that made him look at her again. You just walked up to a table, called someone mom, dropped the word brother into my day, and now you're leaving? She continued. That's not how conversations work. Randy tilted his head slightly. Seems like it just did. She stared at him. For a second, he expected her to back off, to retreat the way most people did when faced with his particular brand of immovable logic. Instead, she leaned forward. Okay, she said, a small edge in her voice now, but not hostility. Something sharper, more focused. Then let me try again. Hi, I'm Melanie. Apparently, I'm your sister. You exist. That's new information. I'd like to know literally anything about that. Randy let out a quiet breath through his nose. There it was, that unexpected complication again. Honesty. Directness. No performance. It made dismissal harder than it should have been. He glanced at his mother. She looked like she was holding herself together by force alone, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles pale. You should have told her, he said. She started, then stopped, pain flashing across her face. I couldn't. Randy's gaze sharpened slightly. That sounds familiar. The words landed, and she flinched. Melanie looked between them again, the pieces not quite fitting yet. Okay, she said slowly. I'm sensing history. Randy let out a short, humorless breath. That's one way to put it. Another pause stretched. Then Melanie did something that felt almost absurd given the circumstances. She pulled out a chair next to her and nudged it with her foot. Sit. It wasn't a request. Randy looked at the chair, then at her. No. Sit, she repeated unfazed. I'm not. Sit, she said again, this time with a small, contained smile, like she knew something he didn't. Randy narrowed his eyes slightly. You always like this? He asked. Only when people try to walk away in the middle of my life changing, she replied. That almost made sense. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, something shifted. This wasn't about his mother. It should have been. It should have stayed clean, contained, directed. But it wasn't. It was about this unexpected, unplanned person who was now looking at him like he mattered in a way he hadn't prepared for. That was unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory demanded data. Slowly, deliberately, Randy pulled the chair back and sat down. Melanie exhaled, clearly satisfied. Great, she said. Progress. He leaned slightly back in his chair, maintaining a careful distance. There. I'm sitting. What now? She studied him for a moment, considering. Then, do you like coffee? She asked. Randy blinked. What? Coffee? She repeated, gesturing vaguely toward the surrounding vendors. It's a basic question. Helps establish baseline humanity. That's your first question? He asked. Yep. Yes, he said after a beat. I like coffee. Good, she said. That's workable. Randy stared at her. There was something disarming about the way she moved through this, like she had decided very quickly that panic wasn't productive and curiosity was. It was effective. So, she continued, folding her hands on the table. Randy, how old are you? 28. Okay, she nodded, filing it away. So that means, she glanced at her mother. You left when he was, what, 3? The words hung there, direct, unfiltered. Randy didn't look at his mother this time. He didn't need to. Yes, he said. Melanie's expression shifted again. Not shock this time, but something heavier. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of it. That's not great, she said quietly. No, Randy agreed. It wasn't. Their mother inhaled sharply. I know how it sounds. It sounds like what it is. Randy cut in, his voice still calm but harder now. Melanie held up a hand gently. Okay, she said. Pause. I'm gonna need, like, a linear version of this at some point. But maybe not in the middle of a food court while people are eating French fries. That's a solid plan, Randy said. Thank you, she replied. I pride myself on practical solutions in emotionally catastrophic moments. He blinked at her, and against his better judgment, something inside him almost reacted like it wanted to laugh. He shut that down immediately. Melanie leaned forward slightly. Look, she said, her tone shifting, softer now, more deliberate. You don't know me. I get that. And I don't know you. But I'd like to fix that. Fix. The word snagged his attention. You can't, he said. She didn't flinch. I didn't say fix everything, she replied. I said fix that part. He studied her for a long moment. Most people pushed too hard, or too little. They either demanded something from him or avoided him entirely. She was doing neither. She was just staying. That was new. Why? He asked finally. The question was simple, but it carried weight he didn't entirely intend. Melanie didn't hesitate. Because you're my brother, she said, like it was obvious, like it mattered. Randy's gaze shifted away for a brief second, landing somewhere unfocused. That word again. Brother. He hadn't had one, hadn't needed one, hadn't considered the absence, until now. You don't even know me, he said. She smiled slightly. Then I guess we should get started. Silence settled again. Not as heavy this time, not as sharp, just waiting. His mother spoke, her voice quieter now. I've thought about this day, she said. For a long time. Randy didn't look at her. I hadn't, he replied. That wasn't entirely true. He had just never believed it would happen. I know I don't deserve. No, he said, cutting her off again. There was no anger in it. Just a boundary. You don't. The words hung between them. Honest. Unavoidable. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the impact. Melanie shifted in her seat, tension flickering across her expression. But she didn't interrupt this time. Randy exhaled slowly. I have a job to finish, he said. I'm here for 2 more days. Melanie perked up slightly. Okay, she said quickly. That's good. That's time. He looked at her. It's not a promise, he said. She shrugged lightly. It's not nothing either. Fair. I'm staying at the riverside, he added, surprising himself slightly. Melanie smiled. Small but genuine. Got it. His mother looked at him, something fragile in her expression. Randy, he stood. This time he didn't hesitate. I'll think about it, he said. It wasn't an agreement. It wasn't closure. But it was undeniably more than he had walked in with. Melanie gave him a small wave. I'll take that. Randy looked at her for one last moment, something unreadable passing through his gaze. Then he turned and walked away, back to his audit, back to numbers that made sense. Except now, for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel quite as complete. Chapter 3, The Fine Print. Randy finished the audit late. Not because the numbers were complicated, they weren't, but because his concentration kept slipping. Rows blurred. Totals required double-checking, not because they were wrong, but because his mind refused to stay anchored long enough to trust them. It was inefficient. He didn't care for inefficiency. By the time he returned to the hotel, the sky had shifted into that dim, muted gray that existed between evening and night. The riverside was quiet in the way most mid-tier hotels were quiet. Not silent, just subdued, like everything inside it operated at half volume. He set his bag on the desk, powered on his laptop, and stared at the screen without actually seeing it. For years, his life had followed a clear structure. Work, travel, routine, repeat. No surprises. No variables that required emotional interpretation. Now, brother. The word surfaced again, uninvited. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. It didn't make sense. Not logically. Not within the framework he had built to keep things manageable. His mother had left. That was the entire entry in the ledger. No footnotes. No amendments. Except now there was one. A living, breathing amendment who had smiled at him like he wasn't a disruption. He rubbed his face once, then pushed himself upright again. This wasn't productive. He reached for his laptop, intent on forcing his mind back into something measurable. A knock at the door stopped him. Randy froze. Nobody knocked on his door. Not here. Not ever. A second knock followed, lighter this time. Randy! He recognized the voice immediately. He didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then, slowly he stood and crossed the room. This was already outside the range of acceptable variables. He opened the door halfway. Melanie stood on the other side, hands tucked into the pockets of a light jacket. Her posture casual but her eyes alert, like she wasn't entirely sure how this reception was going to go. Hi, she said. Randy blinked. How did you find me? She shrugged slightly. You told me where you were staying. I didn't tell you my room number. I asked the front desk. And they gave it to you? She smiled, a little sheepish. Not at first. Randy stared at her. That's concerning. I may have implied it was important, she said. And also that you were my brother. He narrowed his eyes. That's new information for both of us. It carries weight. Randy exhaled quietly. Yes, I'm starting to see that. A pause stretched between them. Then Melanie tilted her head slightly. Are you going to let me in? Or are we doing this entire conversation in a hallway where strangers can form opinions? He hesitated. Letting people into his space wasn't something he did casually. It implied access, presence, proximity, all things he had spent years minimizing. But this was already far beyond normal boundaries. He stepped aside. 5 minutes, he said. Melanie walked in immediately, glancing around the room like she was cataloging it out of habit. Wow, she said. This is aggressively neutral. Randy closed the door behind her. It's a hotel room. Yeah, but even hotel rooms usually try. This looks like it gave up halfway through decorating. That's part of the appeal. She nodded like that made sense to her, then turned back to him. Okay, she said, clapping her hands together once softly. So, we're doing this. Randy crossed his arms. We're doing what, exactly? She gestured vaguely between them. Talking, clarifying, figuring out why my life apparently had a secret chapter one didn't read. That sounds like something you should take up with her, he said. I will, Melanie replied. Later. Right now, I'm here. Randy raised an eyebrow slightly. Why? She didn't hesitate. Because you look like someone who planned on disappearing after lunch. He didn't respond. Because she wasn't wrong. She nodded as if confirming her own assessment. Yeah, thought so. Melanie moved to the small chair by the window and sat down, completely uninvited but entirely comfortable. Randy stayed where he was. Standing felt better. So, she said, looking up at him, let's start simple. He sighed internally. He had a feeling her version of simple wasn't aligned with his. What do you want to know? He asked. She considered that for a moment. Everything, she said. That's not simple. Okay, she amended. Let's narrow it down. What happened to you? The phrasing caught his attention. Not what happened back then. What happened to you? Randy shifted slightly, his gaze drifting toward the window for a brief second. Nothing, he said. Melanie made a face. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call that answer incomplete. It's accurate. It's evasive. He looked back at her. It's sufficient. She held his gaze, unimpressed. For you, she said. Not for me. A faint flicker of irritation surfaced, but it didn't fully take hold. Because again, she wasn't pushing in the way people usually pushed. She was anchoring, waiting but not withdrawing. You want a summary? He asked finally. Yes, she said, leaning forward slightly. He nodded once. She left, he said. My father shut down. He functioned, technically, but that's about it. I went to college. He died my junior year. The words came out flat. Clean. Removed. A report. Melanie didn't react immediately. She just looked at him, her expression shifting subtly as she processed. How did he die? She asked. Car accident, Randy replied. Drunk driver ran a red light. She inhaled quietly. I'm sorry. He shrugged slightly. He died instantly. That helps. Her brow furrowed faintly. That's not usually how people respond to that. It's how I respond to that. Another pause. Melanie leaned back in her chair, studying him in a way that wasn't judgmental, just attentive. And after that? She asked. Randy hesitated. Not because he didn't have an answer, because the answer was empty. Nothing, he said again. She tilted her head. Nothing. I finished school, he clarified. Got a job. I work. I travel. That's it. She watched him for a moment longer. That sounds quiet. It is, he agreed. And you're okay with that? Yes. The answer came quickly, automatically. Melanie didn't challenge it. Not directly. Instead, she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. I get why. That wasn't the response he expected. He frowned slightly. You do? Yeah, she said. If everything important you had got taken away early, then yeah, controlling what's left probably feels safer. Randy blinked. That wasn't wrong. He didn't respond to it. He wasn't sure how. Melanie gave him a small, almost apologetic smile. Sorry, she said. I tend to connect dots out loud. He let out a quiet breath. I've noticed. Another beat passed. Then she straightened slightly. Okay, she said. Your turn. My turn. Yeah, she said. You get to ask questions now. Randy considered that, carefully, because there was one question. It had been there from the moment he saw her. He just hadn't wanted to ask it in front of their mother. How long did you know? He said. Melanie's expression shifted. About you? She asked. He nodded. She shook her head. I didn't, she said. Not until today. He studied her face, looking for hesitation, deflection, anything. He didn't see it. She never told you? He asked. Melanie gave a small, humorless laugh. No. Apparently my childhood had selective editing. Randy exhaled slowly. Something complicated settled in his chest. Not relief. Not exactly. But something adjacent. She told me she left before you were born, he said. Melanie nodded. Yeah, she said. That part checks out. He hesitated again. Then, you were already on the way, he said. It wasn't phrased as a question. Her smile faded. Oh, she said quietly. Silence filled the room. This one was heavier, because it connected things, arranged them into a shape that wasn't easy to ignore. Melanie looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up. So, she said slowly, let me make sure I have this right. Randy didn't interrupt. You were 3, she continued. She left your dad. And you, while she was pregnant with me. He nodded once. That's the math. Melanie let out a slow breath. Wow. There was no humor in it this time. Just wait. Yeah, Randy said. That's one way to put it. She looked at him again, her expression softer now. I didn't know, she said. I figured. Another pause. Then Melanie did something unexpected. She stood. Randy tensed slightly, unsure what she was about to do. Then she walked over and stopped a few feet in front of him. Close enough to matter. Not close enough to overwhelm. For what it's worth, she said quietly. I'm really glad you exist. The words landed differently than everything else. No agenda. No complication. Just simple. Randy didn't know what to do with that, so he defaulted to honesty. I don't, he said. She blinked. Oh, I mean, he added, adjusting slightly. I didn't think it mattered. Melanie studied him for a moment. Then her smile came back, small, careful. It does now. Randy held her gaze. Something shifted again. Not dramatically. Not enough to rewrite anything, but enough to register. Like a number moving just far enough off-center to require a second look. And for the first time since the food court, he didn't immediately try to correct it. Chapter 4, A Structural Weakness. Randy woke earlier than usual. He didn't need an alarm. He rarely did. Years of routine had trained his body to move when it was time, without negotiation. But today, there was a subtle difference. Not urgency, not even restlessness, just an unusual awareness that something had shifted. He sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck, eyes unfocused for a moment. Then it settled. Not like a realization. More like a weight he hadn't accounted for when he went to sleep. Melanie. The thought arrived cleanly. Uncomplicated in structure. Complicated in implication. Randy stood and moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. Shower, coffee, suit, bag. Everything where it was supposed to be. Everything functioning as expected. Except his mind kept returning to small, unnecessary details. The way she hadn't hesitated when she found his room. The way she asked questions without trying to trap him. The way she said, "I'm really glad you exist," like it was something obvious. He paused halfway through tying his tie. That part stuck. It shouldn't have mattered. It didn't align with anything in his established understanding of how people worked. And yet, he finished the knot, adjusted it slightly, and exhaled. Irrelevant. He picked up his bag and left the room. The store was quieter in the morning. Staff moved more efficiently before customers filled the space, and Randy appreciated the absence of unnecessary interference. By 10, he had already reviewed inventory reports and flagged 2 discrepancies, both minor. Predictable, contained, safe. He was halfway through reconciling supplier invoices when his phone buzzed. Randy froze for half a second. Then he reached for it. Unknown number. He stared at the screen, considering. He didn't answer unknown numbers. That was a standard rule. But this, it wasn't unknown. Not really. He accepted the call. "Hello. Good, you answer your phone?" Melanie's voice said immediately, relief evident in the way she exhaled right after. Randy closed his eyes briefly. "That depends on who's calling." "Well, statistically, you just improved my confidence," she said. "So I'm taking that as a win." He leaned back slightly against the counter. "How did you get my number?" "Your boss," she replied. Randy straightened. "My boss." "Relax," she said quickly. "I didn't do anything weird. I just called the store, said I needed to reach the auditor working on site, and they transferred me. Someone gave it to me like it wasn't confidential information, which feels like a problem, but also a solution." Randy pinched the bridge of his nose. "That is absolutely a problem." "Not for me," she said lightly. "So what are you doing?" "I'm working," he said. "Yeah, I figured that. I meant more conceptually. There's nothing conceptual about auditing. Everything is conceptual if you zoom out far enough." Randy paused. "That's not helpful." "Okay, fine," she said. "Are you busy right now?" "Yes." "Okay," she said again, undeterred. "Are you busy at lunch?" He hesitated. He didn't know why. "Yes," he said. "That's not convincing." "It's accurate." "It doesn't sound like it." Randy exhaled quietly. "Why?" There was no point pretending he didn't know what she was asking. "Because I'd like to see you again," she said plainly. No hesitation. No padding. Just the statement. Randy stared ahead, the store blurring slightly out of focus around him. "That's not necessary," he said. "Probably not," she agreed. "But I'd still like to." His grip on the phone tightened just slightly. "You barely know me." "I know enough to want to know more," she said. There was no weight behind it. No expectation. Just consistency. He pushed off the counter, pacing slowly down the empty aisle. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "I didn't say it did." "I'm not." He stopped himself, recalibrating. "I don't do this. This being people," he said. She laughed softly. "Bold strategy, considering you are one." He didn't respond. That wasn't the point. "Look," she continued, her voice softening slightly. "I'm not asking you to rewire your entire existence. I'm just asking for lunch." He stopped walking. "That's how it starts," he said. "What?" "Lunch," he replied. "Then talking. Then." He gestured vaguely, even though she couldn't see it. "More." "Yeah," she said. "That's generally how interaction works. It leads to expectations. Not necessarily. It leads to reliance. Only if you let it." He shook his head slightly. "That's not how it works." "It is if you decide it is," she said. Randy didn't answer, because that was annoyingly not entirely wrong. Silence stretched across the line for a moment. Then Melanie spoke again, quieter this time. "You don't have to trust me," she said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's where you land." A small pause. "But you could give me an hour." Randy looked down at the floor, at the clean, predictable lines of tile stretching beneath him. An hour. Contained. Defined. Limited. It was a measurable risk. He didn't like risks, but he understood them. "What time?" he asked. There was a beat. Then, 12:30? She said, a hint of surprise slipping into her voice. Randy checked the time. That would give him enough margin to finish his current section without interruption. "Same place," he said. "The food court." "Yes." "Wow," she said. "You really know how to plan a second meeting. Very original. It's efficient. It's uninspired. It works." There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "Okay," she said. "Efficient it is." Randy nodded once, though again, she couldn't see it. 12:30. "Don't disappear," she added lightly. "I won't," he said. And that, he realized as he ended the call, was something he hadn't planned on saying. At exactly 12:28, Randy was already seated. Same table. Same position. He had chosen it deliberately, not out of habit this time but out of control. If variables were unavoidable, then minimizing them mattered more. He checked his watch once, then set it face down on the table. At 12:31, Melanie appeared. She spotted him immediately, her expression shifting into something bright and unfiltered as she walked over. "You came early," she said, dropping into the chair across from him. "You came late," he replied. She glanced at her phone. "By 1 minute. Still late." She smiled. "Noted." Randy studied her for a moment. She looked the same, unbothered, unaffected by the weight of everything that existed between them. That shouldn't have been comforting. And yet, it was. "So," she said, leaning forward slightly, "what are we eating today?" "I already ate," he replied. She blinked. "You what?" "I don't wait to eat. You asked me to meet you at lunch. And I did." "That's," she stopped, staring at him. "That's incredibly specific behavior. It's consistent." She shook her head, laughing softly. "Okay," she said. "Good to know. Next time I'll adjust my expectations." Randy tilted his head slightly. "You're assuming there's a next time." She met his gaze without hesitation. "I am." There it was again. That quiet certainty. Randy looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Order something," he said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "For me?" "For yourself," he clarified. "If you're going to be here anyway." She smiled just a little wider this time. "Okay," she said, standing. "Progress." He watched her walk away, weaving easily through the crowd, completely at ease in a way he had never understood. A few minutes later, she returned with food, setting her tray down and immediately diving into it like she hadn't eaten all morning. "You should really try food while it's hot," she said between bites. "It's a whole experience. I'll take that under advisement." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Growth." Randy shook his head slightly, and then, without warning, he felt it again. That subtle shift. Like something in the structure he had spent years building had developed a hairline fracture. Not enough to collapse. Not enough to be visible to anyone else. But enough that if he pressed on it, it might spread. He didn't press. He just sat across from her, watching as she talked about something inconsequential. Something easy. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't immediately calculate how to leave. Chapter 5: Depreciation and Unexpected Gains. Randy did not expect it to become a habit. That was the part that bothered him most. Not that Melanie showed up again. Not that she continued inserting herself into his carefully structured days, but that his resistance was eroding. Slightly, incrementally, just enough to notice. He arrived at the food court at 12:30 again, this time with no internal debate about whether he would actually stay. The decision had been made somewhere between reviewing expense reports and mentally correcting a misfiled invoice. It hadn't felt like a choice so much as an inevitability. That was new. He didn't like inevitability unless it involved numbers. Melanie was already there. She waved when she spotted him, her expression lighting up with the same unfiltered ease he still found vaguely disorienting. "You're on time," she said as he approached. "So are you," he replied, sitting down across from her. She grinned. "Look at us. Growing." Randy set his bag down beside his chair. "That's a questionable assessment." "Disagree," she said. "We've had 2 consecutive, non-accidental meetings. That's basically a pattern." "It's coincidence. It's intentional," she corrected. "You showed up." Randy didn't respond to that immediately, because she wasn't wrong. Again, he found that mildly irritating. Melanie nudged a tray toward him. "I got you something," she said. Randy looked down. A sandwich. Coffee. Exactly the kind of thing he would have chosen himself. His brow furrowed slightly. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she said. "But you also didn't eat lunch yesterday." "I told you I already ate." "At 11:30, she replied. "Which is technically lunch adjacent, not lunch." "It was sufficient." "Not by my standards." Randy looked at the food, then at her. "How did you know what I'd want?" She shrugged lightly. "I guessed. Auditor, early 30s, late 20s. "Close enough," she said, waving it off. "Structured, minimal risk, probably doesn't like surprises. So I went with something safe." He stared at her for a moment. That was surprisingly accurate. "You made an assumption," he said. "Several," she replied cheerfully. "They seem to be working." Randy hesitated. Then slowly he reached for the coffee. It was still warm. That detail registered more than it should have. "Thanks," he said, the word coming out quieter than he expected. Melanie's smile softened just slightly. "You're welcome." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Randy took a sip of the coffee, letting the familiar bitterness settle into something predictable, comforting, controlled. "So," Melanie said after a beat, tearing into her own meal, "tell me something I don't know about you." He arched an eyebrow. "That's a broad category. Pick one thing," she said, mouth half full. "Dealer's choice." Randy leaned back in his chair slightly, considering. This was the kind of question people usually asked to create familiarity, to establish connection. He didn't do that. He wasn't supposed to do that. And yet, "I play the piano," he said. The admission surprised even him. Melanie blinked. "Wait, really?" "Yes." She leaned forward, interest immediate. "Since when?" "Since I was a kid." "Like, lessons?" He nodded. My mother insisted on it, he said, the words coming out flat. Melanie stilled slightly, picking up on the shift. Oh, she said softly. Randy shrugged. I kept it. Do you still play? Yes. She tilted her head. Why? The question wasn't dismissive, just curious. Randy considered the answer. Because it wasn't simple. It's structured, he said finally. There are rules, patterns. If you follow them, it works. Melanie smiled faintly. That tracks. He glanced at her. You don't think that's a strange reason? I think it's a very you reason, she replied. Randy exhaled quietly. Fair. Okay, she said, pointing at him with her fork. My turn. He didn't argue. She thought for a moment. Then, I hate tomatoes, she said. Randy blinked. That's your fact. It's important, she insisted. People put tomatoes in everything without asking. That seems unlikely. It's a real problem. He studied her for a second. You could just remove them. That's not the point, she said. It's the assumption. Tomatoes shouldn't be the default. Randy shook his head slightly. That's not a universal issue. It is for me, she said. A pause slipped between them. Then, without warning, a small, quiet sound escaped him. It took him a second to realize what it was. A laugh. Not loud. Not even noticeable to anyone else. But undeniable. Melanie froze, eyes widening slightly. Did you just laugh? Randy immediately straightened. No. You did, she said, pointing at him again. This time with unmistakable satisfaction. That was a laugh. It wasn't. It absolutely was. It was a breathing anomaly. She stared at him, then broke into a grin. That's even better. Randy looked away briefly, irritation flickering. But it didn't hold, because it hadn't felt like irritation. Not entirely. Melanie leaned back in her chair, studying him with a new level of curiosity. Okay, she said slowly. That's interesting. What is? You, she replied. You're not what I expected. He frowned slightly. What did you expect? She considered that carefully. Honestly, she said. Something colder. Randy didn't react immediately. Then, you've known me for 2 days. Yeah, she said. And in those 2 days, you've shown up twice, answered my questions, and accepted coffee you didn't ask for. That doesn't mean anything. It means something, she said gently. He didn't answer, because there was a part of him, small, quiet, inconvenient, that recognized the truth in that. Melanie shifted slightly, her tone softening. Look, she said. I know this is a lot. For you. For me. For everyone involved. That's an understatement. Yeah, she agreed. But, she hesitated, then continued. It doesn't have to be all bad. Randy's gaze sharpened slightly. That depends on your definition of bad. My definition, she said carefully, doesn't include you walking away from something that could be good. The words landed, measured and deliberate. Randy held her gaze. And what exactly do you think this is? He asked. She smiled slightly. I think it's undefined, she said. Which means it could go either way. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Or it could go nowhere. That's also an option, she admitted. But it feels like a waste. Why? Because you're here, she said simply. Again, that unshakable, straightforward logic. Randy exhaled slowly. You're persistent. I prefer committed, she replied. To what? She met his gaze without hesitation. To not pretending you don't matter. The sentence hung between them. For a moment, everything else faded. The noise, the movement, the predictable chaos of them all of it dimmed in the face of something much quieter, much more dangerous. Randy looked away first, not because he couldn't hold her gaze, but because holding it too long felt like stepping into something he didn't understand. Something without rules. And that was the problem. He dealt in systems, in structures, in outcomes he could trace back to their origins. This was none of those things. And yet, as he sat across from her, finishing a meal he hadn't intended to eat, engaging in a conversation he hadn't planned to have, he realized something. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to register. This wasn't replacing anything. It wasn't rewriting the past. It wasn't fixing what had been broken. But it was adding something, unexpected, unaccounted for, again without a clear entry point. And for the first time in a long time, Randy didn't immediately classify it as a loss. Chapter 6, The Reconciliation Ledger. The third lunch didn't happen. Not because Randy chose to avoid it, because he didn't show up. At 12:30, the chair across from Melanie remained empty, and for once, the absence wasn't theoretical. It was visible, measurable, undeniable. She waited 15 minutes. Then she got up, threw away the barely touched food on her tray, and left with a tightness in her chest she didn't quite know how to categorize. Randy stayed at the store. He worked straight through lunch, reviewing numbers with a focus that bordered on excessive. Every discrepancy was examined twice, every confirmation logged with precision. It was deliberate. It had to be, because if he stopped, he would think. And thinking had become unreliable. By 1:30, he had gone through the same report 3 times. The numbers hadn't changed. He closed the file and exhaled sharply. Inefficient. Again. His phone sat face down beside his laptop. He had seen the missed call. He had seen the text. Are you okay? Simple. Direct. He hadn't replied. Because replying required explanation. And explanation required engagement. Which led to he stopped the thought before it completed. No, that wasn't the problem. The problem was simpler. He had felt something yesterday. Something he couldn't classify. And his response to unfamiliar variables had always been the same. Withdraw. Reassess. Control. It wasn't personal. It was structural. Randy stood, closing his laptop with a decisive click. He had one more day of audit work. Then he would leave, return to his routine, reestablish equilibrium. That was the plan. Plans worked. Melanie didn't call again that afternoon. That, more than anything, unsettled him. He expected persistence. He had already categorized her that way. Consistent, engaged, unwilling to let things dissolve without effort. Silence didn't fit. By evening, the absence had shifted from unnoticed to noticeable. By night, it was present. Randy sat in his hotel room, the TV on but muted, casting flickering light across the walls. He wasn't watching it. His phone rested on the table in front of him. Still, unanswered. Another message had come through. If you need space, that's okay. Just don't disappear completely. He stared at it for a long moment. There was no accusation in the words. No pressure. Just a boundary. That was unexpected. He picked up the phone, put it back down, picked it up again. Then, a knock on the door. Randy stilled. For the second time in 2 days, someone stood on the other side of a door he preferred to keep closed. He crossed the room slower this time. Less curiosity, more anticipation. He opened it. His mother stood there. Not Melanie. His mother. Randy felt something in his chest tighten. Not sharply, not painfully, just noticeably. You found me, he said. She nodded once, her hands clasped tightly together. Melanie told me where you were, she said quietly. Of course she did. Randy stepped back. Not inviting, not blocking, just allowing. She walked in slowly, as though unsure whether the space would accept her. They stood in silence for a moment, different from the silence at lunch. Heavier, loaded. I won't take long, she said. That's probably for the best, Randy replied. She winced slightly, then nodded. I deserve that. Yes, he said simply. There was no heat in it. No need. She took a slow breath. I know I don't have a right to ask anything of you, she began. But I couldn't let this leave things like this. Randy leaned against the desk, folding his arms. You already did, he said. The words landed exactly where he intended them to. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. I was young, she said. Randy didn't respond. I was scared, she continued. That doesn't explain 3 decades, he replied. Her voice faltered. No, it doesn't. Silence filled the room again, pressing in from all sides. You could have left, he said after a moment. You didn't need to disappear. I didn't think I had a choice. You always have a choice, he said. I didn't think your father would let me go without a fight, she said quickly. And she stopped, swallowing. I was already involved with someone else. Randy felt the words settle, confirming what he had already deduced. Not new information, just spoken. I figured, he said. She looked at him, surprised. You did. He nodded once. Math, he said. It's consistent. A hollow sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob. I hurt him, she said. I know I did. Randy's jaw tightened slightly. You destroyed him. The bluntness of it didn't escalate. Clarified. She visibly struggled with that. I never thought he would. She stopped, shaking her head. He was always so steady. I thought he'd recover. Randy let out a quiet breath. He didn't, he said. Not really. Her eyes filled. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't check. That one landed harder. Because it wasn't about emotion. It was about absence. She sat down slowly in the chair Melanie had used the night before, like her legs had decided they couldn't hold her up anymore. I told myself you were better off, she said faintly. Randy stared at her. That's not something you get to decide unilaterally. No, she said. It's not. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the past had finally caught up and demanded space. I never stopped thinking about you, she said suddenly, looking up at him. Randy didn't react. Not outwardly. It doesn't count, he said. Her breath caught. What? Thinking about something doesn't make it real, he explained. Action does. The words weren't loud, but they were absolute. She pressed her hands together, trying to hold on to something. I was afraid, she said again. Randy shook his head slightly. You were selfish. She flinched. You made a decision, he continued, his voice still controlled, precise. And then you let it stand for 25 years. Each word was measured. Each one placed exactly where it needed to be. That's not fear, he said. That's commitment. Tears slipped down her face. She didn't try to wipe them away. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. Good, he replied. Because you're not getting it. The statement hung in the air. Final. For a moment, she looked like she might break under it. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly. I understand. Another silence followed. Different from the others. Cleaner. Like something had been accounted for. Not resolved. But acknowledged. Randy pushed off the desk. This doesn't change anything, he said. I know. You're still the person who left. She inhaled shakily. I know. He studied her for a moment. Then, I'm not her. Melanie's voice echoed in his mind. It wasn't said out loud. But it was there. Persistent. Clear. You don't get to decide what happens next, Randy said, his tone shifting slightly. Not softer, but redirected. But she's not part of what you did. His mother blinked, confusion flickering through her expression. Melanie? Yes, he said. A small, almost fragile hope surfaced in her eyes. You're willing to… I didn't say that, he cut in. The hope faltered. I said she's separate. The distinction mattered. It mattered more than anything else that had been said in that room. His mother nodded slowly, understanding settling in. That's fair, she said. Randy exhaled quietly. For the first time since the conversation began, he felt something loosen. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Just clarity. He moved toward the door and opened it. A silent signal. It was time. His mother stood, wiping at her face with shaky hands. She hesitated for a moment. Then, I'm sorry, she said. Randy didn't respond, because for the first time he realized something. Sorry wasn't a currency he was interested in accepting. Not anymore. She stepped past him and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been. Randy stood there for a long moment. Then he turned back into the room, reaching for his phone. Melanie's message still sat there. Just, don't disappear completely. He stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. This time he didn't hesitate as long. Didn't disappear. Just needed time. He read it once, then sent it. A simple correction. A small adjustment in the ledger. Not a reconciliation. Not yet. But, for the first time, a step that didn't move him away. Chapter 7 Adjustments and Reclassification. Melanie didn't respond right away. That alone told Randy something had shifted. She had established a pattern. Quick replies, steady presence, a kind of conversational persistence that filled space before it had a chance to harden into absence. Her silence, now stretching past an hour, then 2, was noticeable in a way he hadn't anticipated. He finished the audit, closed out discrepancies, filed his final report. Every part of the process completed with his usual precision, but beneath it, something felt incomplete. Like finishing a calculation and realizing the answer was technically correct but missing a variable you couldn't quite name. By the time he returned to his hotel room, the sky had shifted again into that muted gray, and for a brief moment, he stood in the doorway without moving. Then his phone buzzed. A message. Okay, that's fair. He exhaled. Short, controlled. Then another message followed. I'm at the park across from your hotel. Not trying to ambush you. Just, if you feel like not disappearing in person. Randy stared at the screen. There it was again. Not pressure. Not demand. An option. Defined. Limited. Contained. He checked the time. 6:15. There was no professional obligation left. No work-related reason not to go. Which meant the only variable was him. He set his bag down, loosened his tie slightly, then picked up his phone again. 3 minutes later, he was crossing the street. The park wasn't large. Just a stretch of grass, a few benches, a narrow walking path looping around in a lazy circle. A handful of people occupied the space. Someone walking a dog, a couple sitting quietly, the distant sound of a child laughing somewhere out of sight. Melanie sat on a bench near the edge of the path, her posture relaxed but her attention unfocused, like she had been watching the same point for a while. She looked up when he approached. No surprise, just acknowledgement. Hey, she said. Hi. Randy stood for a moment, then sat down beside her. Not too close, not too far. Measured. Balanced. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. Just deliberate. I figured you might need a day, Melanie said finally. I did. She nodded once, accepting it without question. That's fair. Randy glanced at her. You didn't call. I thought about it, she admitted. Then I didn't. He tilted his head slightly. Why not? She shrugged. Because you said you needed time. Calling you every hour felt like ignoring that. That was new. He hadn't expected restraint from her. He found himself appreciating it. I talked to her, he said. Melanie's posture shifted slightly, attention sharpening. Yeah. He nodded once. She came to my room. Her eyebrows lifted a fraction. That tracks. Randy glanced at her again. You're not surprised. She tends to move when she feels like she's losing something, Melanie said carefully. Or someone. The phrasing didn't escape him. Did she tell you that? He asked. No, Melanie said. I figured it out. He studied her for a moment. You do that a lot, he said. Figure things out? She asked. Yes. She smiled faintly. It's a survival skill. Randy looked ahead again, watching someone walk past with a dog that seemed far more interested in everything than its owner did. That makes sense. Pause followed. Then, she confirmed it, he said. Melanie didn't ask what. She didn't need to. The timing, he clarified. You. Melanie's gaze dropped briefly to the ground. Yeah, she said quietly. I figured that part out too. He studied her profile, the way her expression held steady despite the weight of what they were talking about. You're handling this well, he said. She let out a small breath. I'm handling it, she corrected. Well is generous. Fair. He nodded slightly. She told me she didn't think she had a choice, he added. Melanie huffed softly. People love that explanation. You don't agree? I think it's convenient, she replied. It makes something sound inevitable instead of optional. Randy considered that. You're not wrong. She glanced at him. That's twice now you've admitted that. I'm not keeping count. I am, she said lightly. A faint pause settled between them. Then, what did you say to her? Melanie asked. Randy exhaled slowly. The truth. Which version? All of them. She nodded. And, I don't forgive her. Melanie didn't react immediately. Then she nodded again. Okay. No resistance. No attempt to persuade him otherwise. Just acceptance. That's your call, she said. Randy looked at her. You're not going to argue? She shrugged slightly. About that? No. He frowned faintly. Why not? Because it's not mine to fix, she said simply. The words landed cleanly, without complication. Randy leaned back slightly, resting his arms along the back of the bench. She's your mother too, he pointed out. Yeah, Melanie said. But your experience with her isn't mine. I don't get to rewrite that for you. He let that sit for a moment. There was a clarity to her thinking that he hadn't expected. It lacked the usual emotional entanglement people brought into situations like this. It was structured, in its own way. You're very organized, he said. She laughed softly. That might be the first time anyone's described me that way. It fits, he said. Coming from you, I'll take it as a compliment. It is. A small silence followed. Then Melanie shifted slightly, turning to face him more directly. So, she said, where does that leave us? Randy didn't answer immediately, because the question wasn't simple. It wasn't measurable. It didn't have a clear, defined outcome, which meant he had to think about it differently. You're separate, he said finally. She blinked. Separate. From her, he clarified. From what she did. Melanie held his gaze. And that means? It means I don't hold you accountable for it, he said. That's good, she said cautiously. It also means, he continued, that whatever this is, he gestured vaguely between them. It doesn't come with assumptions. Melanie nodded slowly. Okay. No expectations, he added. Okay. No reliance. She tilted her head slightly at that. That one might be harder. His gaze sharpened. Why? Because if you keep showing up, she said, I'm probably going to start expecting you to keep showing up. Randy considered that. That's exactly the problem. No, she said gently. That's just how people work. He shook his head slightly. That's how people get hurt. Melanie studied him for a long moment. Then, maybe, she said. But it's also how people don't. The sentence settled between them, balanced, unresolved. Randy didn't respond, because there wasn't a clear counter to that. Not one that was as simple as he wanted it to be. Melanie leaned back again, letting the tension ease just slightly. Look, she said, I'm not asking you to promise anything. Good, he replied. I'm asking you to not decide the ending before we get there. He frowned faintly. That's inefficient. It's human. Randy exhaled quietly. I'm not good at that. I've noticed. Another pause. Then she smiled. But you're trying. He glanced at her. I didn't say that. You showed up, she said. Again. Randy didn't argue this time, because again she wasn't wrong. And that was becoming a pattern he hadn't anticipated. They sat there for a while after that, conversation drifting into lighter territory. Work, small frustrations, her ongoing campaign against tomatoes. It was easy. Not entirely. There were still moments where he felt the edges of discomfort, where something unfamiliar pressed in and he instinctively wanted to pull back. But he didn't. Not immediately. And that was different. As the sky darkened and the park slowly emptied, Randy realized something. Not as a revelation. Not as a conclusion. Just an observation. This wasn't controlled. It wasn't predictable. It didn't fit into any structure he had relied on before. But it wasn't chaos either. It was something in between. Unstable, maybe, but not unmanageable. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something he needed to fix. Just something he needed to understand. Chapter 8, A Balanced Sheet. Randy's final morning in town arrived without ceremony. No urgency, no tension, just a quiet awareness that something, however undefined, was closing. He packed his bag with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. Laptop secured, files zipped, phone charger coiled and placed in the side pocket exactly where it belonged. Routine, reliable, but as he moved through the process it felt different. Not disrupted, just not enough. He paused by the door, his hand resting lightly on the handle. Then his phone buzzed. Coffee? No pressure. Just figured last day deserves something better than a food court. Randy stared at the message for a moment. Coffee. Simple. Contained. Not a demand. Not a goodbye. He typed his response without overthinking it this time. Where? The reply came almost immediately. Corner Cafe. Across from the bookstore near the park. He knew the place. He had noticed it yesterday and dismissed it as unnecessary. Now he picked up his bag and headed out. The cafe wasn't crowded. Warm light filtered through tall windows, softening everything it touched, lending the space an ease that didn't feel forced. The low hum of conversation blended with the quiet clink of cups and the faint hiss of the espresso machine. Melanie sat at a table near the window. She waved when she saw him, her expression relaxed, less bright than before, but steadier, grounded. Hey, she said as he approached. Hi. He set his bag down beside the chair but didn't sit immediately. Did you already order? He asked. No, she said. Thought I'd let you maintain control over at least one part of this interaction. He almost smiled. Appreciated. They ordered together. That in itself felt anew. Not complicated. Just shared. When they returned to the table, cups in hand, Randy sat down across from her. The space between them familiar now. Not a barrier, not an obstacle. Just space. So, Melanie said, wrapping her hands around her cup. Last day. Yes. You finished the audit? Yes. She nodded. Of course you did. Randy took a sip of his coffee, letting the warmth settle in. You came, she added after a moment. The observation was simple, but it carried weight. I said I would, he replied. You've also said things don't have to mean anything, she pointed out. He set the cup down carefully. They don't. And yet, she said. Randy exhaled slowly. And yet, he repeated. They sat in a brief silence. Not awkward, not strained, just real. Melanie studied him for a moment. So where does this go? She asked. Randy didn't answer immediately, because now it wasn't a question he could dismiss with logic alone. This, he said slowly, isn't something I can map out. She nodded. Yeah, I figured. That doesn't mean I'm comfortable with it. I figured that too. He glanced at her. You don't seem uncomfortable at all. She smiled slightly. Oh, I am, she said. Just not in a way that makes me want to leave. That shifted something. Randy leaned back slightly, considering her. You really don't see this as a risk, he said. I do, she replied. I just don't see it as a loss waiting to happen. He studied her carefully. Every instinct told him to challenge that, to correct it, to explain how outcomes worked, how unpredictability led to damage, but he stopped. Because she wasn't arguing his past. She wasn't rewriting it. She was offering something separate. Something he didn't have a framework for yet. Maybe you're right, he said. The words felt unfamiliar the moment they left his mouth. Melanie blinked. Okay. Now I need you to repeat that slower. I won't, he said. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You're full of surprises. That's not intentional. It doesn't have to be. Another pause settled between them. Then Melanie grew a little more serious. What about her? She asked. Randy's gaze shifted briefly, then returned. I meant what I said, he replied. Nothing's changed there. She nodded. Okay. And that's not going to change because of you, he added. I didn't expect it to, she said. I just wanted to know where that stood. Clear boundary, he said. Good, she replied quietly. Boundaries are helpful. Randy studied her for a moment. You're handling this better than most people would. She shrugged lightly. I don't need everything to resolve at once. That's sufficient. She smiled faintly. Look at me. Adapting to your language. He allowed a small pause. Then, you're not adapting, he said. You're translating. Her expression softened. I like that better. Randy picked up his coffee again but didn't drink it. Instead, he looked at her. Really looked. Not as a complication. Not as an unknown variable. But as her. You're going to keep doing this, he said. It wasn't a question. I am, she said. Showing up. Yeah. Even if I don't always respond the way you expect. She tilted her head slightly. I already know you won't. And that doesn't bother you? It might, she admitted. But that doesn't mean I stop. Randy held her gaze. There was a steadiness there. Not forceful. Not demanding. Just consistent. Something he could understand. Maybe not control. But understand. I leave in an hour, he said. Melanie nodded once. Okay. I don't know what happens after that. Also okay. He hesitated. Then, I'll answer when you call, he said. The sentence felt significant. Because it was. Melanie didn't react immediately. Then her smile returned. Not bright. Not exaggerated. Just sincere. I'll take that, she said. Silence followed. But it didn't feel like the end. Just a pause between lines. Randy finished his coffee, setting the cup down carefully. Then he stood, reaching for his bag. Melanie followed a second later. No dramatic goodbye? She asked lightly. That doesn't seem necessary, he replied. Agreed. They stepped outside together, the morning air cool and steady. For a moment, they stood there, the street stretching out in both directions, open, undefined. Randy shifted his weight slightly. Then, without overthinking it, he reached out. Not formal, not forced, just direct. Melanie looked at his hand for a brief second, then took it, her grip firm and warm. Not lingering, not hesitant, just real. They let go a second later. Travel safe, she said. I will. And, don't vanish, Rand. Why met her gaze. I won't, he said. And this time it wasn't just a statement. It was a decision. He turned, walking toward his car, his step steady, measured, but not as rigid as they had been before. Behind him, Melanie didn't call after him. She didn't need to, because for the first time, Randy understood something he had spent most of his life rejecting. Not everything had to be guaranteed to be worth starting. Some things you just let exist, and see where they go. As he reached his car, he paused for a second, glancing back. Melanie was still there, standing on the sidewalk, watching, not waiting, not expecting, just present. Randy gave a small nod. Then he got in the car and drove away. Not alone. Not exactly. And for the first time, that distinction didn't feel like a risk. Felt like balance.